What's your favorite scary movie?
For millions, that question is the chilling opening to a pop culture phenomenon that redefined the slasher genre. It's a line that brings up images of a masked killer, a ringing phone, and a deadly game. But what if I told you that behind the iconic mask and the clever Hollywood script lies a true story, a story far more terrifying than any movie? For moviegoers, it was a blockbuster scare. But for one small college town in Florida, the horror was all too real. In August 1990, the horrifying acts of a real-life monster named Danny Rolling paralyzed Gainesville and would later inspire one of the most famous horror movies of all time. This is the true story of the Gainesville Ripper, from the brutal crimes that held a city hostage to the terrifying investigation that gripped a nation. The end of August in Gainesville, Florida, is usually buzzing with excitement. It's when the quiet college town comes alive, as students from all over the country flood in for the fall semester at the University of Florida and Santa Fe Community College. It's a time for new beginnings and new friendships. But in 1990, that feeling of hope was about to be completely shattered. A predator was hiding in the shadows of the student apartment complexes, a drifter with a long and twisted history of violence. He was holed up in a makeshift camp in the woods right behind the university, just watching and waiting. He was ready to unleash a wave of terror that would leave the community and the nation in shock. His name was Danny Rolling, and over 4 horrific days, he would earn a new one: the Gainesville Ripper. The terror began on Friday, August 24, 1990. 17-year-old Christina Powell and 18-year-old Sonia Larson were settling into their new lives as college freshmen. Their ground-floor apartment was filled with the promise of the semester ahead, but they'd never make it to their first class. Sometime during the night, Danny Rolling, armed with a knife and a screwdriver, pried open their sliding glass door. He found Christina Powell asleep on a downstairs couch and paused, watching her, before creeping upstairs to Sonia Larson's bedroom. What happened next was a brutal explosion of violence. Rolling attacked Larson in her bed, taping her mouth shut with duct tape to stifle her screams as he stabbed her repeatedly. He then went downstairs and assaulted Christina Powell before murdering her. To add a layer of pure psychological horror to his crimes, he posed the victims' bodies in sexually provocative positions, and before leaving, took a shower in their apartment. For 2 days, a deceptive quiet hung over Gainesville. The parents of Christina and Sonia grew worried when they couldn't get a hold of their daughters. On Sunday, August 26th, police entered the apartment and discovered the horrific scene. A double homicide of 2 promising young students was a shocking event in the sleepy college town, but no one could have guessed it was only the beginning. As investigators were still processing the scene, another young life had already been taken. 18-year-old Krista Hoyt, a student at Santa Fe Community College, lived alone just a few miles away. She was a bright, reliable young woman who worked as a records clerk at the Alachua County Sheriff's Office and dreamed of one day becoming a crime scene investigator herself. When she didn't show up for her late-night shift on Sunday, her coworkers got concerned. Just after midnight, in the early hours of Monday, August 27th, police entered her apartment and found a scene of unparalleled horror. Rolling had broken in, subdued and assaulted her, and then murdered her. But he didn't stop there. In a final gruesome act, he decapitated her, placing her head on a bookshelf so that it faced her own body. The discovery of a third victim, mutilated in such a horrific way, sent a shockwave of terror through Gainesville. The news spread like wildfire. A serial killer was on the loose. The methods were brutal, the attacks were brazen, and the victims seemed to be random students. Fear gripped the community in a way it never had before. Students stopped going out alone, even during the day. They bought baseball bats, barricaded their doors, and slept in shifts. The university even considered canceling classes as thousands of students packed their bags and fled the campus. Hundreds never came back. Gainesville, once a town of youthful optimism, had become a place of paranoia and dread. Every shadow seemed to hide a monster, and every night brought the same terrifying question: who would be next? The monster wasn't finished. On that same Monday, August 27th, while the city was just starting to process the horror of Krista Hoyt's murder, Danny Rolling was already stalking his next victims. 23-year-old students, Tracy Pauls and Manuel Manny Taboada, shared an apartment at the Gatorwood complex. They were the last to fall prey to the Gainesville Ripper. Breaking in through a sliding door, Rolling first ran into Manny Taboada in his bedroom. Unlike the other attacks, this time the victim was awake. A struggle broke out, but Taboada, though muscular, was ultimately overpowered and killed. Hearing the noise, Tracy Pauls ran down the hall, saw Rolling, and tried to barricade herself in her room. But he smashed through the door. He bound and assaulted her before stabbing her 3 times in the back. Unlike his other crime scenes, Rolling's ritual was cut short. Police think the struggle with Taboada may have thrown him off his routine. He posed Tracy's body, but left Manny's where it was. The next morning, on Tuesday, August 28th, their bodies were discovered. The killing spree was over. In just 4 days, 5 young lives had been stolen. But behind the chilling headlines and the Gainesville Ripper moniker were 5 real people whose futures were taken from them. Sonia Larson, 18, was described as shy, artistic, and deeply caring. A friend wrote that their connection was something way deeper than adolescent infatuation, speaking to the love she shared with those around her. Christina Powell, 17, was her roommate and friend. Her mother, Patricia Powell, remembered her daughter's life and had to endure the horror of sitting through the trial years later, calling the experience of looking at her daughter's killer disgusting. Krista Hoyt, 18, was known for her warm spirit and ambition. She was already working for the sheriff's office, and her murder was deeply personal for the officers who knew her and her dream of one day joining them. Manuel Manny Taboada, 23, was a fighter. His friend remembered him as someone who never stayed down. Tragically, his instinct to fight back was his final act. His nephew, who wasn't even born when the murders happened, was so moved by his family's story that he later became a police officer with the Gainesville Police Department. Tracy Pauls, 23, was classy with a bit of goofiness. Her brother, Ricky Pauls, faced her killer at his execution, a final, painful act in a lifetime of having to live without his sister. These weren't just names on a list. They were children, siblings, and friends. Their loss created a wound in the heart of the Gainesville community that has never fully healed, a wound now memorialized on a public space that became sacred ground. With 5 students dead in less than 72 hours, Gainesville was a city terrified. The pressure on law enforcement to find the killer was immense. A massive task force was assembled, bringing together local, state, and federal agents in one of the largest investigations in Florida's history. But in those first days, they had very few leads. The killer was a ghost. He left behind nightmarish crime scenes, but almost nothing else. Danny Rolling, a man with a long criminal past, knew how to cover his tracks, a skill some think he learned from his father, who was a police officer. As fear turned to panic, the push for an arrest intensified. Investigators scrambled to find any link between the victims, but the connections were thin at best. In their desperation, the investigation took a wrong turn, one that would nearly destroy another young man's life. Their focus landed on Edward Lewis Humphrey, a 20-year-old University of Florida student with a history of mental illness. Humphrey had recently been arrested for assaulting his grandmother and lived in the same apartment complex as the first two victims. Based on this circumstantial evidence, law enforcement zeroed in. His name was leaked to the media, and he was publicly declared the prime suspect. For months, Edward Humphrey was the face of the Gainesville Ripper, but as forensic evidence was analyzed, it became clear they had the wrong man. A grand jury refused to indict him on the murder charges, citing a lack of evidence. The most critical piece of evidence was blood type. His didn't match the type B blood of the killer found at the crime scenes. Edward Humphrey was another victim in this case. His life turned upside down by a premature and public accusation. The real killer, meanwhile, was already in police custody on an unrelated charge. His connection to the murders still a secret. To understand the evil that descended on Gainesville, we have to go back to Shreveport, Louisiana, to the troubled and violent beginnings of Danny Harold Rolling. Born on May 26, 1954, his life began in a home filled with pain. His father, James Rolling, was a police officer and a Korean War veteran who may have suffered from PTSD. He was also a violent, controlling man who never wanted children and made sure Danny knew it. The abuse started when Danny was just an infant. His father beat him for not crawling correctly. The physical and verbal torment was constant, inflicted for the smallest things, even for breathing in a way his father didn't like. James Rolling would later beat Danny's dog to death in his son's arms. Danny's mother, Claudia, was also a victim of her husband's abuse and tried to leave him multiple times, but always came back. She suffered her own mental health crises, including a nervous breakdown and a suicide attempt. Growing up in this nightmare, Danny was described by school counselors as having an inferiority complex, with aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control. He found some solace in music and art, teaching himself to play a guitar he got for Christmas at age 15, one of his few happy memories. But he also turned to drugs and alcohol, and his voyeurism started at 14, when he was caught peeping into a neighbor's window. His adult life was a revolving door of petty crimes, armed robberies, and prison sentences. The violence inside him was escalating. In November 1989, after getting fired from a restaurant job in Shreveport, he committed a horrific act that foreshadowed the Gainesville murders. He broke into the home of the Grissom family and murdered 24-year-old Julie Grissom, her 8-year-old nephew Sean, and her 55-year-old father Tom. The crime scene was eerily similar to what would later be discovered in Florida. Julie Grissom's body was mutilated, cleaned, and posed. The final break came in May 1990. After an argument, Danny shot his father in the stomach and head. James Rolling survived but lost an eye. After trying to kill his father, Danny Rolling fled Louisiana, stole an alias, and made his way to Florida. He eventually set up that hidden campsite in the woods of Gainesville, a monster forged in violence, now ready to start his own reign of terror. While the Gainesville task force was chasing the wrong man, the real breakthrough was quietly taking shape hundreds of miles away in Louisiana. Detectives there noticed the chilling similarities between the Gainesville murders and their own unsolved triple homicide of the Grissom family. An investigator from Florida traveled to Louisiana to look into the possible link. The final, crucial piece of the puzzle came from a tip. A woman named Cindy Jurasich, who knew Danny Rolling from her church in Shreveport, heard about the university murders while traveling through Florida. She remembered unsettling comments Rolling had made, including telling her then-husband that he liked to stick knives in people. Haunted by the memory, she called the Crime Stoppers hotline and gave them his name. Investigators followed the tip and soon discovered that Danny Rolling was already in custody. 10 days after the final murders, he had been arrested for robbing a Winn-Dixie supermarket in Ocala, just 40 miles south of Gainesville. He'd been sitting in a jail cell the entire time the manhunt was focused on Edward Humphrey. The evidence quickly fell into place. Investigators confirmed Rolling had type B blood, the same as the killer in both the Gainesville and Shreveport murders. They searched his campsite and found a trove of evidence, including tools that matched the pry marks on the victim's doors. Most chillingly, they discovered a cassette player with audio tapes, Rolling's own audio diaries, where he rambled about his crimes and his desire to become a superstar killer like Ted Bundy. Facing a mountain of evidence, Rolling began to talk. He used a fellow inmate, Bobby Lewis, as a mouthpiece to confess to the murders. His defense team would later argue that he suffered from a severe personality disorder and had an alternate personality named Gemini, who was responsible for the killings, a claim possibly inspired by the movie The Exorcist III, which he'd seen shortly before the murders. But the prosecution and victims' families saw it as just an act. On February 15, 1994, as his trial was about to begin, Danny Rolling shocked the courtroom by pleading guilty to all charges. His confession spared the families the pain of a long trial, but it didn't spare him from justice. During the penalty phase, the jury heard the horrific details of his crimes and recommended 5 death sentences. Danny Rolling was sent to death row, his reign of terror officially over. But the story of his crimes was about to take on a new life in pop culture. In 1994, while Danny Rolling was on trial, a struggling screenwriter named Kevin Williamson was house-sitting in Los Angeles. One night, he turned on the TV and got sucked into a news program about the Gainesville Ripper case, the story of a killer terrorizing a college town, breaking into apartments, and murdering students planted a seed of fear in his mind. Later that night, Williamson noticed an open window in the house he didn't remember opening. Spooked, he called a friend. As they talked, their conversation drifted from the real horror of the Gainesville Ripper to the fictional horror of movies like Halloween. That blend of real-life fear and movie tropes sparked an idea. Williamson wrote an 18-page script about a young woman being terrorized over the phone by a killer obsessed with scary movies. That script became the legendary opening scene of the 1996 film Scream. While the movie isn't a direct retelling of the Gainesville murders, Rolling didn't wear a mask or taunt his victims with phone calls. The core inspiration is undeniable. Williamson has openly cited the case as the catalyst for the film. The atmosphere of fear that gripped the college town, the idea of a killer moving unseen among students, and the sheer terror of an intruder in your home. All of it was channeled into the fictional world of Woodsboro. Scream became a cultural phenomenon, celebrated for reviving the slasher genre with its clever, self-aware humor. But at its heart, the film's terror is rooted in a very real tragedy. The fear that made millions of moviegoers jump in their seats was the same fear that had forced students in Gainesville to sleep with baseball bats by their beds. The on-screen horror that launched a billion-dollar franchise that was inspired by the real pain and loss suffered by the families of 5 innocent students. The story of the Gainesville Ripper is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are real. If you found this deep dive into the case compelling, please consider subscribing and liking the video. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories, honor the victims, and explore the complex line between true crime and pop culture. For over a decade, Danny Rolling sat on death row. On October 25, 2006, he was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. In his final moments, he sang a hymn he had written. Before his death, He gave a written confession to a pastor, finally admitting to the 1989 triple murder of the Grissom family in Shreveport, bringing his official victim count to 8. The execution brought a legal end to the case, but for the Gainesville community, the scars remain. The terror of August 1990 left an indelible mark on the city's psyche. But out of that darkness came a powerful symbol of remembrance, the 34th Street Wall. This long retaining wall, which had served as a public bulletin board, became a place of mourning. Shortly after the murders, a memorial was painted on the wall listing the names of the 5 victims: Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Krista Hoyt, Manuel Taboada, and Tracy Pauls. What was meant as a temporary tribute has become a permanent landmark, a sacred space diligently maintained by the community. It stands as a constant reminder, not of the monster who took their lives, but of the vibrant young people they were, and the futures they were denied. It's a testament to how a community, faced with unimaginable horror, came together to ensure its victims would never be forgotten.